Harrington estate sat at the end of a winding driveway lined with maple trees, already turning gold in the October evening light. I smoothed my navy dress one more time before Marcus rang the doorbell, checking my reflection in the brass knocker. Hair down, like he'd suggested. Simple makeup. No sharp edges. I had spent 8 months commanding men and women through one of the most dangerous deployments of my career, and here I was, adjusting myself to look softer for a family dinner. Patricia opened the door with the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her gaze traveled from my face down to my sensible flats and back up again, cataloging every imperfection along the way. "Alina, you look tired," she air-kissed somewhere near my cheek. "I suppose that's to be expected after all those months away." "It's good to see you too, Mrs. Harrington." Marcus placed his hand on my lower back, guiding me inside. The foyer smelled of fresh flowers and furniture polish. Family photographs lined the walls in matching silver frames, generations of Harringtons smiling from country clubs and graduation ceremonies and European vacations. I had been engaged to Marcus for over a year. I wasn't in a single one. The dining room gleamed under a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my parents' first house. White tablecloth, fresh roses as the centerpiece. Vivian and her husband were already seated, along with Brooke, who was photographing her place setting for what I assumed was Instagram. Gerald sat at the head of the table, swirling whiskey in a heavy glass. "There she is," Gerald said, not bothering to stand. "The wandering sailor returns." "Good evening, Mr. Harrington." Patricia directed me to a seat at the far end of the table, away from Marcus, who was positioned between his sisters. I took my place without comment. A server appeared with appetizers, some kind of seared scallop arrangement that looked too beautiful to eat. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Vivian's children and their private school achievements. Brooke's upcoming brand partnership. Gerald's golf handicap. Marcus laughed at his father's jokes and complimented his mother's choice of wine and never once looked in my direction. It was Patricia who finally addressed me directly, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. "Let's be honest, Marcus." She wasn't looking at her son. She was looking directly at me. "She's damaged goods, a woman who spent years on ships with men. Well, we all know what that means." The room went silent. I watched Vivian's fork stop halfway to her mouth. Brooke's eyes widened with something that looked almost like delight. Gerald took a long sip of his whiskey, as if Patricia had simply commented on the weather. I felt Marcus's hand find mine under the table. He squeezed once. But when I looked at him, waiting for him to say something, anything, he simply stared at his plate. Vivian leaned toward Brooke, her whisper carrying perfectly across the table. "No respectable family wants a daughter-in-law who chose war over starting a family. She's nearly 35. What's left?" Brooke reached across the table and lifted my hand, examining my fingers like specimens. "Look at these calluses and the nails." She dropped my hand with visible disgust. "You can always tell." "I hope," Gerald said, finally looking at me, "that you've gotten all of this out of your system now. Marcus has been very patient." I set my napkin beside my plate and stood slowly. "Excuse me for a moment." No one responded. As I walked toward the bathroom, I heard Patricia's voice resume its pleasant dinner party tone, as if the previous minute hadn't happened at all. The bathroom was decorated in pale blue with gold fixtures. I locked the door and gripped the marble sink, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger. This woman with her hair carefully styled, and her soft dress and her quiet compliance. 8 months ago, I commanded a rescue under enemy fire. Tonight, I was hiding in a bathroom because a woman in pearls called me broken. I thought about the Persian Gulf, about standing on the deck of my ship as we moved into hostile waters, about the 47 people who were alive right now because I refused to leave them behind. I thought about the medal sitting in its velvet case in my luggage, the medal I would receive tomorrow in front of national television cameras. They measured my worth in wedding rings. The Navy measured it in lives saved. I released the sink and straightened my spine. In the mirror, something shifted. Not enough for them to notice when I returned to the table, but enough for me. I grew up in a house where the walls were thin and the love was thick. My father spent 30 years as a machinist at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, coming home each night with grease under his fingernails and stories about the carriers he helped keep afloat. My mother cleaned houses for families, not unlike the Harringtons, women who left cash on the counter and never learned her name. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had pride. When I was 7 years old, my father took me to see the USS Enterprise return from deployment. I remember standing on the pier, surrounded by families holding signs and wiping tears, watching that massive ship glide into port like a floating city. The sailors lined the deck in their dress whites, and I thought they were the most magnificent people I had ever seen. "That could be you someday, Mija," my father said, lifting me onto his shoulders. "If you work hard enough, that could be you." I never forgot those words. Through every advanced placement class, every scholarship application, every moment when someone suggested that a girl from our neighborhood should set her sights a little lower, I remembered my father's voice and the way the sun caught those white uniforms. I enlisted at 18, the day after high school graduation. My parents drove me to the recruiting office in my father's pickup truck, the one with the rust spots on the fender and the radio that only worked when it felt like it. My mother cried. My father shook my hand like I was already an officer. "Make us proud," he said, "but more important, make yourself proud." Boot camp was brutal in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was smaller than most of the men and some of the women. I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I learned quickly that the Navy doesn't just want bodies. It wants minds. It wants people who can stay calm when everything around them is chaos, who can make decisions when the wrong choice means people die. I discovered I was very good at staying calm. By 22, I had completed my first deployment. By 25, I had earned my commission and begun officer training. By 28, I was leading intelligence briefings in Arabic, a language I had taught myself during long nights at sea with nothing but textbooks and determination. By 31, I was given command of a destroyer escort, one of the youngest officers in the Pacific Fleet to hold such a position. My crew called me Iron Alina, not because I was cold, but because I didn't bend. When a storm hit and half the crew was sick and scared, I stood on the bridge and talked us through it. When equipment failed during a critical mission, I found solutions that weren't in any manual. When a young ensign made a mistake that could have ended his career, I took him aside and taught him how to do better instead of writing him up. I loved the Navy the way some people love their families. It gave me purpose. It gave me brothers and sisters in uniform who would die for me as readily as I would die for them. It gave me a version of myself I could respect. And then I met Marcus. It was a charity gala in San Diego, one of those events where military officers are invited to make the donors feel patriotic. I was in my dress whites, feeling slightly out of place among the evening gowns and tuxedos. He approached me near the bar, this tall man with kind eyes and a slightly crooked smile, and asked what it was like to live on a ship. Most people asked that question with condescension or disbelief. Marcus asked it with genuine curiosity. We talked for 3 hours. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done much of in the months since my last deployment. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. For the first year, everything seemed possible. Marcus flew to see me whenever I had leave. He sent care packages to my ship, silly things like gourmet coffee and crossword puzzles and photographs of himself making ridiculous faces. He told me he was proud of me. He told me I was the most impressive person he had ever met. I should have noticed when that started to change. The first time I met his family was at a restaurant in New York. Patricia looked at my uniform and asked if I could have worn something more appropriate. Vivian spent the entire meal talking about her children, never once asking about my life. Brooke took a photograph of me without permission and posted it with a caption about Marcus's military phase. But Marcus held my hand under the table, and I told myself it was enough. The engagement party was worse. Held at the Harrington estate, filled with their friends and associates, I stood in the corner while Patricia introduced everyone except me. When someone finally asked who I was, she waved vaguely in my direction and said, "Oh, that's Marcus's friend." She does something with boats. Marcus apologized later. He said his mother was just traditional, that she would warm up to me in time. He asked if I could maybe not wear my uniform to family events anymore. He asked if I could maybe not talk about my deployments so much. He asked if I could maybe just try to fit in. And I did. God help me, I tried. I stopped correcting people when they called me the boat girl. I stopped mentioning my rank, my commendations, my responsibilities. When Patricia seated me at the far end of the table, I smiled and said nothing. When Gerald asked what I actually did in the Navy, implying that surely a woman couldn't do anything important, I gave a vague answer about administrative work. I made myself small. I let them believe I was small. Because I loved Marcus, or at least I loved who I thought he was, and I wanted to believe that love could be enough. When I deployed to the Persian Gulf, the Harrington family's relief was almost palpable. Patricia hugged Marcus at the airport like I was already gone, murmuring something about 8 months going by quickly, and then they could figure things out. I pretended not to hear. The deployment was supposed to be routine. Intelligence gathering, security operations, the kind of work I had done a dozen times before. But routine ended on a night in March when everything went wrong. I can't share all the details. Some of it is still classified. What I can say is that 47 American personnel were trapped in hostile territory, and I was the commanding officer responsible for getting them out. We had limited resources, limited time, and an enemy that wanted those Americans dead. I remember standing in the operations center, looking at the faces of my crew. Some of them were barely out of training. All of them were looking at me, waiting for me to tell them what to do. "We don't leave anyone behind," I said. Not one understood. We went in under fire. We lost communication twice. At one point, my executive officer told me we needed to evacuate, that we had recovered most of the personnel and staying longer was suicide. "Most isn't all," I told him. "We stay until everyone is on board." It took 4 more hours. 4 hours of dodging enemy fire, of making impossible decisions, of refusing to accept that anyone was expendable. When the last person was pulled onto our ship, I finally allowed myself to breathe. 47 people went home to their families because we didn't give up, because I didn't give up. The Navy Cross was announced a month later. One of the highest honors a naval officer can receive, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. When Admiral Chen called to tell me, I sat alone in my quarters and cried for the first time in years. Not because of the medal, but because I finally had proof that I wasn't what the Harringtons believed me to be. I wasn't damaged goods. I was a commander who had saved 47 lives. The ceremony was scheduled for the day after my return home. The Secretary of the Navy would present the medal personally, and it would be broadcast nationally. The location was supposed to be Naval Base San Diego, but Marcus had a different idea. "What if we did it at my parents' house?" he suggested, his voice bright with what I now recognize as obliviousness. "It could be a surprise. They could see what you actually do, and then they'd have to accept you." I should have said no. I should have recognized that surprising people into respect never works. But part of me, the part that still wanted to belong somewhere, agreed. I flew home with the Navy Cross in my luggage and hope in my chest. I wore the soft dress and let my hair down and walked into that dining room believing that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would change everything. Instead, I sat at the end of a table while a woman in pearls called me damaged goods, and my fiancé held my hand and said nothing at all. I returned to the table with my composure intact, at least on the surface. The conversation had moved on to Brooke's upcoming trip to Milan, something about a Fashion Week event and the followers she expected to gain. No one acknowledged my return. The server placed a plate of lamb in front of me, and I cut it into small pieces without eating any of it. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of family anecdotes that didn't include me and pointed comments disguised as casual observation. Patricia mentioned how lovely it was that Vivian had given her 3 grandchildren by 32. Gerald asked Marcus about his quarterly projections and nodded approvingly at numbers I didn't understand and didn't care to. Brooke showed everyone her latest Instagram post and complained that the lighting in the dining room wasn't flattering for content. I counted the minutes until I could reasonably excuse myself for the night. When the plates were finally cleared and Patricia suggested after-dinner drinks in the sitting room, I stood and smiled the empty smile I had perfected over the past year. I'm actually quite tired from the travel. I think I'll head up to the guest room if that's all right. Of course, Patricia said, not bothering to hide her relief. You do look exhausted. Marcus, why don't you stay and have a brandy with your father? Marcus glanced at me, and for a moment I thought he might offer to come with me. Instead, he nodded. I'll be up soon, babe. I climbed the stairs alone, my hand trailing along the polished banister. The guest room was at the end of the hall, as far from the family bedrooms as architecturally possible. I had stayed in this room 4 times now. There was still no photograph of me anywhere in it. I changed out of the navy dress and into comfortable clothes, then sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. My suitcase was open on the floor, the velvet case containing my Navy cross tucked beneath a layer of civilian clothes. Tomorrow, the Secretary of the Navy would pin that medal to my chest in front of cameras and reporters, and the family that thought I was broken. The irony wasn't lost on me. I should have been reviewing my remarks for the ceremony or calling Admiral Chen to confirm the logistics. Instead, I found myself walking to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds below. The lights from the sitting room cast yellow rectangles on the grass. I could hear the faint murmur of voices, the Harringtons continuing their evening without me. I don't know what made me leave the room. Maybe I wanted water. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I could walk through this house without feeling like an intruder. Whatever the reason, I found myself padding down the stairs in bare feet, keeping to the shadows out of habit. The kitchen was through a side hallway, past the sitting room door. I was almost there when I heard Patricia's voice, sharp and clear in the quiet house. You can still get out of this, Marcus. You know that, don't you? I stopped. My training told me to keep moving, to not eavesdrop on conversations that weren't meant for me. But something held me in place, some instinct that recognized a threat. Mom, please, Marcus sounded tired. We've talked about this. Have we really talked about what this means for your future, for our family's reputation? Patricia's voice dropped, but I could still hear every word. She'll never fit in here, Marcus. She's been ruined. All those years on ships, all those things she's seen and done. Women like that don't become wives and mothers. They become cautionary tales. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't even during combat. I love her, Mom. I'm sure you think you do. But love fades, and then what are you left with? A woman with calluses on her hands and nightmares in her head. A woman who chose war over everything a normal woman wants. There was a long pause. I held my breath. Mom, I love her, but... Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I know she's not what you pictured. But... That single word hung in the air like a verdict. I had faced enemy fire. I had made decisions that meant life or death for dozens of people. I had stood on the bridge of a ship in a storm and refused to show fear. But that one word, spoken by the man who was supposed to love me, cut deeper than any of it. But. He loved me, but. There was always a but. I wasn't enough as I was. I needed to be softer, quieter, smaller. I needed to hide the parts of myself that had earned me respect from admirals and loyalty from my crew. For this family, for this man, I needed to be less than I was. I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out with numb fingers. Admiral Chen, ceremony confirmed for 900 tomorrow, Harrington residence. Secretary is looking forward to meeting your fiancé's family. This will be quite a surprise for them. See you in the morning, Commander. I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to call the Admiral back and cancel everything. I could claim illness, family emergency, anything to avoid having these people witness my honor. The thought of Patricia watching the Secretary of the Navy describe my heroism made my stomach turn. She didn't deserve to see it. None of them did. But then I thought about my father, who had worked his whole life with grease under his fingernails, so that I could become something more. I thought about my mother, who had cleaned houses for women like Patricia and never let their condescension diminish her dignity. I thought about the 47 people who were alive because I refused to leave them behind. I thought about all the months I had spent making myself small for people who would never see me as enough. No more. My fingers moved across the screen before I could second-guess myself. Ceremony proceeds as planned, looking forward to it. I sent the message and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more powerful. Clarity. I walked back to the sitting room doorway. Patricia was still talking, something about suitable alternatives and family friends with eligible daughters. Marcus was staring into his brandy glass. Gerald was reading a newspaper as if his wife wasn't actively plotting to end his son's engagement. I just wanted to say goodnight, I said from the doorway. They all startled. Patricia's hand flew to her chest. Marcus looked up with guilt written across his face. I need to be well rested for tomorrow. I kept my voice pleasant, my expression neutral. I have an early morning. Patricia recovered quickly, her smile snapping back into place. Oh, do you have plans? Yes, I met her eyes directly for the first time all evening. I do. I turned and walked back up the stairs, leaving them to wonder what that meant. For the first time since arriving at the Harrington estate, I felt like myself. Tomorrow, they would see exactly who I was, and I would never make myself small for anyone again. I woke before dawn, my internal clock still set to shipboard time. The house was silent, the Harringtons presumably sleeping off their brandy and self-satisfaction. I lay in the guest bed for a few minutes, watching the first gray light creep through the curtains, and felt a calm I hadn't experienced in months. The kind of calm that settles over you when a decision has been made and there's nothing left to do but see it through. Today was the day. I slipped out of bed and moved quietly to my suitcase. Beneath the civilian clothes I had packed to please Marcus, beneath the soft fabrics and muted colors that were supposed to make me acceptable, lay my dress white uniform. I lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of the fabric, the crispness of the pressed creases. This uniform had been with me through 3 deployments, 2 promotions, and 1 night in the Persian Gulf that had changed everything. I carried it to the bathroom and hung it on the back of the door. Then I showered, taking my time, letting the hot water wash away the residue of the previous evening. Patricia's words echoed in my mind, but they seemed smaller now, less potent. Damaged goods. The phrase that had cut so deeply just hours ago now felt almost absurd. I dried my hair and pinned it back in the regulation style I had worn for 16 years. Every pin in its place, every strand accounted for. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to look polished for the cameras. Then I opened the velvet case that held my navy cross. The metal gleamed in the bathroom light, the bronze cross with its sailing ship at the center, the ribbon of navy blue and white. I ran my thumb across its surface, remembering the weight of the citation when Admiral Chen had read it aloud. I had earned this, not through family connections or social standing. I had earned it by refusing to leave 47 people behind, by being exactly the kind of woman Patricia believed was broken. They measured my worth in wedding rings. The Navy measured it in lives saved. I pinned the medal to my uniform jacket and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't Marcus's fiancé or Patricia's project or the boat girl who didn't quite fit in. She was Commander Elena Vasquez, one of the most decorated female officers in the Pacific Fleet. I dressed slowly, deliberately, savoring each button. When I was fully dressed, I stood at attention for a moment, squaring my shoulders, lifting my chin. This was who I was. This was who I had always been. My phone buzzed. A text from the advance team. Ma'am, we're 30 minutes out. Secretary's motorcade departed D.C. on schedule. I typed back a simple acknowledgement and made my way downstairs. The kitchen was empty. I made coffee and carried my cup to the front window, watching the street wake up in the early morning light. At 7:30, the first black SUV appeared at the end of the street. I watched it park discreetly near the corner, followed by a second vehicle a few minutes later. Men in dark suits emerged, speaking into earpieces, scanning the surroundings with professional attention. The advance team was establishing a perimeter. By 800, a local news van had pulled up across the street. A cameraman began setting up equipment while a reporter checked her notes. More vehicles arrived, official sedans and unmarked cars, filling the spaces along the curb. Neighbors emerged onto their porches, confusion evident on their faces. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a silk bathrobe, her face still creased from sleep. What on earth is going on out there? She moved to the window. There are cars everywhere, and is that a news van? It appears so, I said calmly. Patricia squinted at the growing crowd. This is a private neighborhood. They can't just park wherever they want. She reached for her phone. I'm calling the police. I wouldn't do that. Something in my voice made her pause. She turned to look at me properly for the first time, and I watched her eyes travel from my face to my uniform to the medal on my chest. Confusion flickered across her features, followed by the first stirring of unease. Why are you wearing that? Before I could answer, Gerald appeared behind her, followed by Vivian and her husband, then Brooke, who was filming the chaos outside with her phone. There are men with earpieces in our driveway, Gerald announced. I called the non-emergency line, and they told me to stay inside and cooperate fully. Cooperate with what? Brooke pressed her face to the window. Oh my God, is that CNN? Maybe they're here for my collab announcement. Don't be ridiculous, Vivian snapped. CNN doesn't cover Instagram influencers. The front door opened, and Marcus walked in from outside, his face pale. He had apparently gone to investigate and encountered something unexpected. Elena, his voice was strange, tight. There's a man outside asking for Commander Vasquez. He called you Commander. The room went silent. I set down my coffee cup and smoothed the front of my uniform jacket. That would be because I am a commander. Commander Elena Vasquez, United States Navy. Patricia's mouth opened and closed. Gerald's newspaper slipped from his fingers. Vivian grabbed her husband's arm, and Brooke lowered her phone, staring at me with naked confusion. But you said you did administrative work, Gerald managed. No, you assumed I did administrative work. I never corrected you. I met his eyes steadily. I command a destroyer escort in the Pacific Fleet. I've led intelligence operations in 3 theaters. I speak fluent Arabic. And 8 months ago, I led a rescue mission in the Persian Gulf that saved 47 American lives under hostile fire. I touched the medal on my chest. This is the Navy Cross. It's the second highest decoration that can be awarded by the Department of the Navy, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. The Secretary of the Navy is on his way here right now to present it to me personally, in a ceremony that will be broadcast nationally. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant murmur of reporters setting up outside. Patricia found her voice first. The Secretary of the Navy is coming here, to our house. Yes, Marcus suggested it as a surprise for the family. I allowed myself a small smile. Surprise. My phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket and answered with practiced professionalism. Yes, Mr. Secretary, I'm ready. I listened for a moment. Yes, sir. I'll meet you at the door. Thank you, sir. I ended the call and looked at the assembled Harringtons, all frozen in various states of shock. Patricia was clutching her bathrobe closed as if suddenly aware of her appearance. Gerald had gone pale. Vivian was crying silently. Brooke seemed to have forgotten how to use her phone. And Marcus was staring at me like he had never seen me before. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps he had only ever seen the version of me I had created to please his family. The motorcade will be here in approximately 10 minutes, I said. You may want to change out of your pajamas. There will be cameras. I walked past them toward the front door, my uniform crisp, my medals gleaming. Through the glass, I could see the perimeter tightening, the reporters gathering, the neighbors clustering on their lawns. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice, high and strained. I didn't know. Marcus, why didn't you tell us? I didn't know she was. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Couldn't bring herself to say what I was, what I had always been. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. A security officer approached immediately, his salute crisp and respectful. "Commander Vasquez, the secretary's motorcade is 5 minutes out. Is there anything you need, ma'am?" "No, thank you. I'm ready." I stood on the porch of the Harrington estate in my dress whites, the morning sun catching the bronze of my Navy cross. Behind me, I could hear the frantic sounds of the family scrambling to make themselves presentable, Patricia's sharp commands and Brooke's panicked questions. A black sedan with small American flags on the hood turned onto the street, followed by 2 more official vehicles. The motorcade had arrived. I watched it approach, my hands steady at my sides, my breathing calm. In a matter of minutes, the Secretary of the Navy would step out of that car. The cameras would roll. The nation would learn about the rescue mission in the Persian Gulf and the 47 lives that had been saved. And the Harringtons, who had spent years dismissing me and belittling my career, would watch it all unfold on their own front lawn. I had spent months trying to earn their approval, trying to fit into their narrow definition of acceptable. Now they would learn exactly how wrong they had been about me. The sedan pulled into the driveway. I straightened my spine and prepared to meet the Secretary of the Navy. The motorcade came to a stop in the circular driveway, a procession of black vehicles that looked almost surreal against the backdrop of Patricia's carefully maintained rose bushes. I counted 3 sedans, 2 SUVs, and a communications van. The neighbors had abandoned any pretense of casual observation and were now openly gathered at the edge of the property, held back by a line of security personnel. The cameras were already rolling. I could see reporters doing stand-ups on the lawn, their breath visible in the cool morning air as they spoke into microphones. A helicopter circled overhead, its news logo visible on the side. This was no longer just a ceremony. This was a national event. The door of the lead sedan opened, and Admiral Chen stepped out first. I had served under him for 3 years, and the sight of his familiar face steadied something inside me. He was in his dress whites, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulder boards, his expression carrying the gravity appropriate to the occasion. Behind him came 2 other flag officers I recognized from Pacific Fleet Command. And then the Secretary of the Navy emerged from the second vehicle. Secretary Thomas Whitmore was a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in service to his country. He had been a naval aviator before entering politics, and even now, well into his 60s, he carried himself with the precision of military training. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the cameras, the crowd, the house, and finally coming to rest on me. He smiled. I descended the porch steps and walked toward the motorcade, my stride measured, my posture perfect. Behind me, I heard the front door open and close as the Harringtons finally emerged, presumably having thrown on whatever clothes they could find in their panic. "Commander Vasquez," Secretary Whitmore extended his hand as I approached. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." "The honor is mine, Mr. Secretary." His handshake was firm, his eyes warm. "I've read the after-action reports 3 times. What you did out there was extraordinary. The courage, the leadership, the refusal to leave anyone behind." He shook his head slowly. "This medal doesn't even begin to cover it." "I had an exceptional crew, sir. They deserve this recognition as much as I do. And that right there is why you're getting it." He released my hand and turned to survey the property. "Beautiful home. Is this where your fiancé's family lives?" "Yes, sir." "Wonderful. I'm glad they'll be here to witness this. Family support means everything in our line of work." He paused, his expression shifting slightly as he noticed something over my shoulder. "Ah, I believe they're coming out now." I turned to see the Harringtons approaching in a ragged line. Patricia had managed to put on a cream-colored dress, though her hair was still disheveled and her makeup hastily applied. Gerald was in slacks and a blazer, looking like he'd dressed in the dark. Vivian clutched her husband's arm, her eyes red-rimmed. Brooke had somehow found time to do her makeup perfectly, though her outfit clashed spectacularly. And Marcus walked behind them all, his face a mask of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. Patricia reached us first, her social instincts apparently overriding her shock. She extended her hand to the secretary with a smile that trembled only slightly at the edges. "Mr. Secretary, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Patricia Harrington. This is our home." Secretary Whitmore shook her hand politely. "Mrs. Harrington, thank you for hosting this ceremony. It's not every day we get to honor one of our most exceptional officers in such a personal setting." "Yes, well," Patricia's smile flickered. "We're very proud of Alina, of course. We've always known she was special." The lie was so brazen, so reflexive that I almost admired it. Almost. Admiral Chen stepped forward, his voice cutting through the awkward moment. "Commander, we should begin. The networks are ready for the live broadcast." "Of course, sir." The next few minutes were a blur of organization. The honor guard assembled on the lawn, 8 sailors in dress whites forming 2 perfect lines. A podium had been set up facing the driveway, with the American flag and the Navy flag flanking it. Cameras repositioned, reporters took their places, and the crowd of neighbors pressed closer against the security perimeter. The Harringtons were directed to stand to one side, in full view of the cameras. Patricia kept adjusting her hair, her eyes darting between the secretary and the news crews with an expression caught somewhere between horror and desperate social calculation. Gerald stood rigidly beside her, his face the color of old parchment. Vivian was openly crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her husband kept patting her shoulder awkwardly. Brooke had recovered enough to start filming everything on her phone, though she kept angling herself to stay out of the professional camera shots. And Marcus stood apart from his family, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity I couldn't interpret. A sound technician approached me with a small microphone, clipping it discreetly to my uniform jacket. "You're going to be great, Commander," she whispered. "The whole country is watching." The whole country. I thought about my parents, who were probably gathered around their television in Norfolk right now. My father with his calloused hands and his proud smile. My mother with tears already streaming down her face. They had known about the ceremony, of course. They had wanted to be here, but I had asked them to watch from home. At the time, I told myself it was because I didn't want to overwhelm the Harringtons. The truth was, I hadn't wanted my parents to witness how Marcus's family treated me. Now, standing in my dress whites with the Navy cross on my chest and the Secretary of the Navy at my side, I wished they were here. They deserved to see this. They deserved to be proud. Admiral Chen stepped to the podium, and the crowd fell silent. "Good morning. I am Admiral James Chen, Commander of the United States Pacific Fleet. It is my profound honor to be here today for a ceremony recognizing extraordinary heroism in the service of our nation." His voice carried across the lawn, amplified by the microphone, broadcast to millions of Americans watching at home. I stood at attention, my eyes fixed on a point just above the crowd, my breathing steady. 8 months ago, in the Persian Gulf, a routine operation became a crisis. 47 American personnel were trapped in hostile territory, cut off from support, with enemy forces closing in. The situation was dire. Extraction seemed impossible. He paused, letting the words sink in. Commander Alina Vasquez was the senior officer on scene. She had a choice. She could have followed protocol, called for backup, waited for conditions to improve. No one would have blamed her. But Commander Vasquez understood something that separates good officers from exceptional ones. She understood that 47 lives hung in the balance, and that waiting meant losing them. Patricia shifted uncomfortably beside Gerald. I saw her whisper something to him, but I couldn't hear what. Commander Vasquez led her team into hostile waters, under direct fire, with enemy vessels in pursuit. For over 6 hours, she coordinated the extraction operation while under constant attack. When her executive officer recommended pulling back after recovering most of the personnel, she refused. Her exact words, recorded in the after-action report, were, "Most isn't all. We stay until everyone is on board." I remembered saying those words. I remembered the fear in my XO's eyes, the exhaustion in my crew, the distant sound of gunfire. I remembered the moment when I had to choose between my own safety and the lives of people counting on me. It hadn't felt like heroism at the time. It had felt like the only possible choice. Commander Vasquez remained in the operational zone until every last American was recovered. 47 people are alive today because of her leadership, her courage, and her absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. Admiral Chen stepped back, and Secretary Whitmore took his place at the podium. The Navy Cross is awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. It is the second highest decoration that can be bestowed by the Department of the Navy, and it is not given lightly. In the history of our Navy, fewer than 100 women have received this honor. He turned to face me directly, and I felt the weight of his gaze, the weight of the moment, the weight of everything I had worked for and everything I had survived. Commander Elena Vasquez, your actions in the Persian Gulf exemplify the highest traditions of naval service. Your courage under fire, your decisive leadership, and your unwavering commitment to your fellow Americans represent everything our Navy stands for. It is my privilege and my honor to present you with the Navy Cross. An aide stepped forward with the medal case, opening it to reveal the bronze cross with its deep blue ribbon. Secretary Whitmore lifted the medal carefully, and I stepped forward to receive it. I pin this medal not just for the 47 lives you saved, he said quietly. His voice meant only for me, but for every young woman watching today who needs to see what's possible. He attached the medal to my uniform, adjusting it slightly so it hung perfectly beside my existing decorations. Then he stepped back and saluted. I returned the salute, my arm rising with the precision of 16 years of practice. Commander Vasquez, he said, his voice amplified again for the broadcast. On behalf of the President, the Department of Defense, and a grateful nation, congratulations. The honor guard snapped to attention. The crowd burst into applause. Somewhere in the distance, I heard neighbors cheering, reporters speaking excitedly into cameras, the helicopter overhead capturing the moment from above. But my eyes found the Harringtons. Patricia stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with something that might have been shock or shame or simply the inability to reconcile what she was seeing with what she believed. The woman she had called damaged goods less than 12 hours ago was being honored by the Secretary of the Navy on national television, and there was nothing she could do to unsee it. Gerald had removed his glasses and was polishing them compulsively, his movements jerky and uncertain. Vivian had stopped crying and was simply staring at me, her expression unreadable. Her husband was watching the cameras, seeming to realize for the first time that his family's proximity to this moment would be recorded forever. Brooke had lowered her phone, her carefully curated image apparently forgotten in the face of something she couldn't filter or edit or control. And Marcus had tears streaming down his face, though whether they were tears of pride or regret or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. He was looking at me the way someone looks at something precious they've broken and only now realize they can't fix. The applause continued. The cameras kept rolling, and I stood there in my dress whites, the Navy Cross gleaming on my chest, finally being seen for exactly who I was. The formal ceremony concluded, but the cameras didn't stop. Reporters surged forward as the security perimeter relaxed, microphones extended, questions flying through the crisp morning air. Secretary Whitmore stood beside me, fielding the initial wave with practiced ease. Commander Vasquez represents the very best of our naval forces, he told CNN. Her actions that night saved 47 American lives. That's 47 families who got their loved ones back because of her courage. I answered questions about the mission, keeping my responses measured and focused on my crew. Yes, it had been dangerous. Yes, there had been moments of doubt. No, I had never considered leaving anyone behind. The reporters scribbled notes, cameras captured every word, and I was acutely aware of the Harringtons standing just at the edge of the frame. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt a strategic repositioning. I watched her edge closer to the main cluster of cameras, smoothing her hair, arranging her expression into something resembling maternal pride. She was adapting, I realized, recalculating. If she couldn't distance herself from me, she would try to claim proximity to my success instead. A reporter from NBC noticed her movement. "Mrs. Harrington, you must be so proud. How long have you known about Commander Vasquez's heroism?" The question was innocent enough, but I saw Patricia's composure flicker. She hadn't known. She had never bothered to ask. And now she had to answer on national television. "We've always known Alina was dedicated to her work," Patricia managed, her smile tight. "Of course, we're tremendously proud." "She's practically family," Gerald added, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who had spent decades talking his way through difficult situations. "We've supported her career from the very beginning." The lie was so complete, so smooth, that I almost admired the audacity. Almost. But then something unexpected happened. A hot mic caught Patricia's next words, spoken to Gerald in what she thought was a private moment. Her whisper carried clearly across the lawn, picked up by the nearby boom microphone and broadcast to every network covering the event. I didn't know. I didn't know she was actually important. The reporter's eyebrows shot up. Cameras swiveled. And Patricia's face went from composed to horrified in the span of a heartbeat as she realized her words had been captured. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her mouth open and close as she tried to formulate some explanation or denial. But there was nothing to say. The truth had slipped out and millions of people had heard it. Secretary Whitmore's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He turned to address the cameras directly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what had just happened. "Commander Vasquez's importance isn't measured by recognition or medals. It's measured by the 47 Americans who went home to their families because she refused to give up on them. That's the kind of importance that matters." It was a graceful redirect, a diplomatic rescue of an awkward moment. But the damage was done. I could already see phones lighting up, social media notifications flooding in. Patricia's whispered confession would be trending within the hour. Vivian pushed through the crowd, tears streaming freely now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. She stopped a few feet away from me, her husband hovering uncertainly behind her. "Alina," her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, we didn't." She couldn't finish the sentence. What could she say? That she hadn't known I was a hero, that she would have treated me differently if she had. The admission would only make things worse. "Thank you, Vivian," I said quietly. There was no warmth in my voice, but there was no cruelty either. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I appreciate you saying that." A security officer stepped between us, gently redirecting Vivian back toward the family. She went without resistance, stumbling slightly in her haste to retreat from the cameras. Brooke had vanished entirely, having apparently fled inside the house when she realized that being caught on national television in her current state would do more harm to her brand than any association with my honor could help. I imagined her frantically checking social media, trying to get ahead of whatever narrative was forming. Gerald stood rigidly beside Patricia, his decades of corporate composure finally failing him. He kept starting to say something, then stopping, his mouth working soundlessly. The man who had spent years dismissing my career with patronizing questions about what I actually did had nothing to say now that the answer was being broadcast to the nation. A reporter from Fox News approached me, microphone extended. "Commander Vasquez, this ceremony is taking place at your fiancé's family home. That must make this moment even more special. How does it feel to share this honor with them?" The question was a gift, and we both knew it. I could have buried the Harringtons right there, could have told the truth about how they had treated me, about what Patricia had said the night before. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted the world to know exactly what kind of people they were. But I thought about my parents, watching at home. I thought about the 47 families who were seeing this ceremony. I thought about what kind of officer, what kind of person I wanted to be. "Today is about the 47 people who made it home," I said calmly. "That's all that matters." The reporter nodded, clearly hoping for more but respecting my choice to take the high road. She moved on to her next question, and I felt something settle inside me. I had refused to stoop to their level. That was its own kind of victory. Marcus finally approached after the main wave of interviews subsided. The cameras had moved on to capturing B-roll of the honor guard and the property, giving us a small bubble of semi-privacy. He stood before me with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world rearrange itself. "Elena," his voice was barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were in the Navy, but I didn't understand. I never really understood who you were." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. I'm so sorry for last night, for everything my family said, for not defending you." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, though I didn't return the pressure. "I should have stood up for you. I should have been proud of you out loud, not just in private." "Yes, you should have." He flinched at the simple agreement, no softening, no reassurance. I watched him struggle with my response, with the new dynamic between us. For months, I had been the one trying to fit in, trying to earn acceptance. Now the power had shifted, and he didn't know how to navigate it. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Later, when this is all over, I want to make this right. I want to understand everything about your career, your service. I want to be the partner you deserve." I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had loved, or thought I had loved. This man who had asked me to be less so that his family could feel more. He meant what he was saying. I believed that. The problem was that it had taken a national broadcast and a medal from the Secretary of the Navy to make him see me. "We can talk," I said finally. "But not today. Today belongs to my crew and the people we saved." Relief flooded his face, and I felt a twinge of something like pity. He thought he still had a chance. He didn't understand yet that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired by apologies alone. Admiral Chen approached, rescuing me from the conversation. "Commander, the Secretary would like a word before he departs, and there's a call from the Pentagon regarding next week's ceremony in Washington." "Of course, sir." I turned away from Marcus without another word, falling into step beside the Admiral. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice, high and desperate, trying to explain something to a reporter. Gerald was demanding that someone remove the cameras from their property. Vivian was sobbing audibly. But I didn't look back. Secretary Whitmore was waiting by his vehicle, the door open, an aide speaking quietly into his ear. He dismissed the aide when he saw me approach and extended his hand once more. "Commander, it's been an honor, truly." His grip was warm, genuine. "I understand you'll be at the Pentagon next week for the formal recognition ceremony. The President is looking forward to meeting you." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm honored." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, I heard what happened last night. One of the advance team mentioned something about the family's reaction to your arrival." He glanced toward the Harringtons, his expression cooling. "Some people measure worth by the wrong metrics. Don't let them dim your light, Commander." "I won't, sir. Not anymore." He nodded, satisfied, and climbed into the vehicle. The motorcade engines rumbled to life, and I stepped back, saluting as the Secretary's car began to move. The honor guard saluted in unison, a final tribute before the official portion of the ceremony concluded. I stood on the Harrington lawn and watched the motorcade disappear down the street, taking with it the cameras, the reporters, the official weight of the Navy's recognition. What remained was the wreckage of a family's pretensions and the quiet clarity of my own resolve. Some people measured worth in different ways. The Navy measured mine in lives saved. 47 people were with their families today. That was my answer to anyone who questioned whether I had made the right choice. The lawn emptied slowly. News vans packed up their equipment and pulled away one by one. Neighbors lingered at the edge of the property, hoping for one more glimpse of something newsworthy, before eventually drifting back to their own homes. The security perimeter dissolved, black SUVs departing with quiet efficiency until only Admiral Chen's vehicle remained. I stood on the driveway, feeling the cool autumn breeze against my face, and allowed myself a moment of stillness. The morning had been a whirlwind, but now the eye of the storm had passed, and I could finally breathe. Admiral Chen approached, his cap tucked under his arm. Commander, your transport to the airfield is ready whenever you are. We have a flight to Washington scheduled for 1400 hours. The Pentagon wants you there for preliminary briefings before next week's ceremony. Thank you, Admiral. I just need a few minutes. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take whatever time you need. I'll be in the vehicle. He walked away, leaving me alone on the driveway of the Harrington estate. The house loomed behind me, its elegant facade now somehow diminished. All those months I had spent trying to earn a place within those walls, trying to be worthy of the family who lived there. Now I understood that the problem had never been my worthiness. It had been their inability to see it. The front door opened, and Marcus emerged. He had changed into proper clothes, though his eyes were still red and his movements uncertain. He crossed the lawn toward me with the hesitant steps of someone approaching a wounded animal, unsure of their welcome. Alina, please, his voice cracked. Can we just talk for a minute before you go? I turned to face him fully, taking in the man I had agreed to marry. He was handsome, I had always thought so. Kind in his way, but kindness that only functioned in private, that disappeared the moment it required courage, wasn't really kindness at all. It was convenience. What do you want to say, Marcus? I want to say I'm sorry. I want to say I should have defended you. I should have told my family to stop, should have been proud of you openly, should have. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I should have been a better man. Yes, you should have. I know. He took a step closer, his eyes searching my face. But I can be better, starting now, starting today. I saw what you are, Alina. I saw what you've accomplished, what you're capable of. And I want to be worthy of you. Please give me a chance to prove it. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering all the times he had asked me to be less. Don't wear your uniform. Don't mention your rank. Don't talk about deployment. Tone down the military stuff. Be softer. Be quieter. Be smaller. He had loved a version of me that didn't exist. A diminished version I had created to please him and his family. Now he wanted to love the real me, but only because the real me had been validated by national recognition. Only because the Secretary of the Navy had pinned a medal on my chest and called me extraordinary. Marcus, I kept my voice gentle but firm. You asked me to hide who I was. For months, you asked me to be someone else so that your family would accept me. And I did it. I made myself small because I thought that's what love required. I know, I was wrong, I see that now. You see it because the Secretary of the Navy told you to see it. Because cameras showed up and reporters called me a hero. I shook my head slowly. Where was this revelation last night when your mother called me damaged goods? Where was your defense of me then? He had no answer. His mouth worked silently, but there were no words that could undo what had happened, what he had allowed to happen. I reached down and slipped the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond caught the autumn sunlight, throwing tiny rainbows across my palm. It was a beautiful ring. Expensive. The kind of ring Patricia had probably helped him select, something suitable for a Harrington bride. Find someone who fits, Marcus. I pressed the ring into his palm, closing his fingers around it. I'm done trying to. His face crumpled. Alina, please, don't do this. I love you. Maybe you do. Maybe you love who you thought I could become. I stepped back, putting distance between us. But you never loved who I actually am. You were embarrassed by it. And I deserve someone who's proud of me without needing the Navy to tell them why. Tears spilled down his cheeks, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction in his pain, but no guilt either. This wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. It was the inevitable conclusion of a relationship built on conditions I could never meet. I'm sorry it took all of this for you to see me, I said quietly. I'm sorry I let myself be invisible for so long, but that's over now. I turned and walked toward Admiral Chen's waiting vehicle. Behind me, I heard Marcus call my name once more, his voice breaking on the syllables. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. The Admiral was standing beside the car, holding the door open. His expression was carefully neutral, but I caught a glimmer of approval in his eyes as I approached. Ready, Commander. Ready, sir. I climbed into the vehicle, settling into the leather seat as the door closed behind me. Through the tinted window, I could see Marcus still standing on the driveway, the engagement ring clutched in his fist. Patricia had emerged from the house and was hurrying toward him, her face a mask of distress. Gerald followed behind, his earlier composure completely shattered. Admiral Chen slid into the seat beside me and nodded to the driver. The car pulled smoothly out of the driveway, turning onto the tree-lined street that led away from the Harrington estate. I watched the house recede through the rear window, the manicured lawn where the ceremony had taken place, the porch where I had stood in my dress whites, waiting for the world to see who I really was, the windows of the guest room where I had spent so many uncomfortable nights, trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. "The Pentagon ceremony will be more formal," Admiral Chen said, reviewing something on his tablet. "The president will present the medal again for official photographs. There's also talk of a possible promotion recommendation, given your record and this recognition." "Thank you, sir." He glanced up from the screen, studying my face. "You handled yourself well today, Commander. The situation with the family could have become complicated. You showed remarkable restraint." "The day wasn't about them, sir. It was about the 47 people who made it home." A small smile crossed his weathered features. "That's exactly the right answer. That's why you're getting promoted." Car turned onto the main road, leaving the quiet Connecticut neighborhood behind. I thought about my parents in Norfolk, probably still sitting in front of their television, my mother clutching tissues and my father pretending his eyes weren't wet. I would call them from Washington. I would tell them everything about the ceremony, about the Harringtons, about Marcus. They would be angry on my behalf, and then they would be proud, and then my father would say something about how the sea always reveals true character. I thought about my crew, scattered across the country on their own leave, many of them probably watching the broadcast. I would see them again soon, back on duty, back where I belonged. The ocean had always been more of a home to me than any house on solid ground. The Harrington estate disappeared from view as we crested a small hill. I turned forward in my seat, facing the road ahead. I had spent 3 deployments defending people who would never know my name. I could certainly survive a family who refused to learn it. The difference was, I no longer had to. The Navy vehicle carried me toward the airfield, toward Washington, toward a future I had earned through sacrifice and courage, and an absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. Behind me was a man who had loved a smaller version of me, and a family who had never bothered to look beyond their assumptions. Ahead of me was everything I had worked for, everything I deserved. I straightened my spine, touched the Navy cross on my chest, and let myself smile.